Alright, hello and welcome everyone to a builds refresh video for Nezha, who, not an exalted Warframe, but has a new build with this update all the same because of the Temple Subsume. Now, before we even get in here and talk about the build itself, I do want to discuss that this is a Pyrotechnic Subsume, Temple's ability, and the way that it works specifically on Nezha theoretically could be considered a bug. So, if this build doesn't work in the future, if it gets changed in some way that makes this build no longer function, that'll be a pinned comment in the comment section down below. But I think that this isn't like ridiculously overpowered or anything, and doesn't really have any reason to be changed. So, we're going to talk about it. With that, we're of course going to talk about the shards first. We have 2 casting speed shards. These are immensely useful to this build because we are going to be casting a whole heck of a lot. You can't speed up the Divine Spears greatly because part of their animation is actually based on your FPS, but what you can speed up is the casting of pyrotechnics, which is what we're going for here. Are these necessary? No, not even a little bit, but they are insanely nice for quicker casting. Shocker. With that, other shards are going to be kind of just up to your taste. There's a number of other things that could go in those slots, things like equilibrium shards, parkour shards, really whatever you want. So let's just talk about what the build is here. So, we are, of course, doing the thing that Nezha has to do with the pyrotechnics, which is use it for Divine Retribution. Divine Retribution, for those that forgot, is status effects spread to all enemies that are speared, and spear explosions are scaled by 1.5x of the remaining slash, toxin, and heat status effects, making them considerably stronger when used with those status effects. Of course, in the past, whenever we used Dante's abilities on a build like this, the slash was the modifier, but now with the pyrotechnics, we get to do the heat modifier instead, which I would say is just generally a bit stronger, especially since the big damage rework that we had. With that, of course, because we care about heat procs, we're on Archon Vitality. This adds quite a lot to this build. Even if you don't have one that's fully leveled, I would really suggest using this, and we're going to talk about exactly what this is doing in the build whenever we're showing it. But otherwise, there's some things here that might look a little strange. First and foremost, to talk about the Transient Fortitude and the Fleeting Expertise that are in this build. So, part of what you want to do in this build is lower your duration. So, while the positive efficiency on Fleeting is really awesome here, the minus ability duration is actually kind of the better bit. You want both of these stats, which is making Fleeting arguably better than it's ever been before. Transient Fortitude is only at rank 8 of 10. Of course, I do have a Transient Fortitude that is max rank, and you can slot it in here if you're more comfortable with that, but the big difference that this makes is that on our 4, max rank, we have a 1.5 second duration on it. But at 2 ranks lower, we get just over 2 seconds. You can go for either one that you want. I personally find that the additional half a second that the enemies are on spears does matter and can help like with positioning or like needing to like see the enemies that you like want to actually hit with your one and stuff like that. It just gives you just that little bit more time, but you will lose a little bit of strength because of it. That being said, the strength isn't going to matter a whole heck of a lot because we already have plenty of strength in this build without that addition. Though it is worth noting that strength shards are one of the things that you could put on here that will make the build just objectively better because it increases both the modifier of the damage multiplier here, the base damage of pyro, and how many pillars you get out of pyrotechnics as well. So more strength is good, but the 17% duration here I think is a good balance. If you don't want to go level another Transient Fortitude to rank 8 and you already have a max one, it's also definitely very reasonable to have an additional Fleeting Expertise at rank 4, and that can get you kind of to the same place. You'll be at 23% instead of 17, which I found good, and I think that overall that's what I prefer, but you know, there's certainly less endo spent on a different ranked Fleeting Expertise. With that, other stuff is kind of expected. We're on every single range mod in the game. This is, of course, giving us some amount of negative strength, but we just have to deal with that. We want as much range as possible to hit as many enemies with the Divine Spears as we can, and we're on just about a 40-meter radius with that, which is great. Of course, we are making up some of that strength deficit with Umbral Intensify, which is good. We are on Umbral Intensify and not on Precision Intensify because we want the modifier both for Pyrotechnics and for Divine Spears, not just one. So we are on this. Also, the modifier on Blazing Chakram's debuff is also quite good to have, so we would prefer that if we can get it, and we can. Otherwise, we're on Molt Augmented for another 60% strength, which is fantastic. Growing Power with whenever we inflict status effects with weapons, we're also going to get the additional 25% strength. And then we're on Aegis. Aegis is really to taste here. You don't have to run this, and in many like pieces of content, you're going to be more than fine without this. But it is just a really nice additional defensive barrier because your shields are still going to be taking damage because Nezha's 3 gives you DR, not overguard, and is like, as it's depleted and everything, you can just re-up it, but you do need to have health and shield still in order to live. So with that, that's kind of what's the whole deal here. I do find that keeping Blazing Chakram is much better, as Nezha's 1 is useless really without duration. But Blazing Chakram is still just fine. If you just like need to nuke an enemy, you can toss your 2 at them, and then you have 3 seconds to just kill them outright with whatever big damage burst you're going to be doing, whether that's a heavy attack or whatever. With that though, that's what we have to talk about here. The only thing left is to show it. Now, I'm going to explain this interaction before I do it, okay? So, these are just regular enemies. You can see we're proccing Growing Power with Death Cube here, which is a factor. Death Cube's just the normal stuff we've been showing off, but I'll show it in a moment. The big thing here is that enemies who are ragdolled when hit by pyrotechnics, each part of their body is hit by pyrotechnics individually, which means that each enemy will give you like 10 heat procs or more, depending on their amount of body parts, instead of giving you just like the 2 that you'd expect with Archon Vitality. That means that you can hit 4 and then hit 1, and all the enemies get a whole lot of heat procs. Now, could that be considered a bug? Maybe. Or that's the way the pyrotechnics is supposed to work, because each pillar that you generate is an AoE, and it is really effective in other places where, like, you can combine it with Vauban's 4 in order to get a reasonably effective build that way too. So I don't think that there's anything that really points to this definitely being unintended, and I also don't think it's too strong. Obviously, you saw it nuke that group very effectively, doing like 1.2 million damage, but we have plenty of things that do that, and any enemy that is resistant to status, this basically does nothing to, not to mention the additional downsides that are here when affecting Xmas units. Now, to specifically talk about Xmas units, we need to talk about the way that this is going to be affecting XMI, because Xmas are immune to the getting ragdolled part of this, but it does still work on them if you do it right. Now, the way that spears work, which we're just going to show here, is you hit 4, and you can see that the enemies are speared for a moment, and then it goes away. They don't linger on it for the full 2 seconds. But if you cast fast, you can hit 4 and then hit 1, and it will work. You can still get some pretty good effectiveness out of this and like strip off overguard and stuff, and then once you've stripped off overguard, you can start getting like the really good numbers and actually still kill Xmas groups. You just need to make sure you're casting really quickly. So if there's a lot of Xmas left, that's something that you'll need to pay attention to. So it can kill Xmas groups, but you got to be a little particular with it, and it's part of the reason that the low duration is really nice. Otherwise, there's not a whole lot to talk about with this build. You're still going to like spam your 3 anytime it's down, you put it back up. You'd have that invincibility on like the between stages of this, but you're pretty much just going to always make sure that your 3 is on. And it's good. It's like a nice solid build. It has good range, like just under 40 meters. It's kind of a, it kind of works very similarly to the way that Varuna's 1 setup works, but I would say that it is on the whole worse than that. Though it can be like more, depending on like what your preferred playstyle is, it can be like more or less convenient. Also, as a bonus, I know we're not running Equilibrium, but it is worth noting that if you do want to introduce an Equilibrium shard, obviously our 2 can generate quite a lot of health orbs if we are so desired to do that. Anyway, let's jump into Tav and show it off. As a reminder, the enemies on Tav are 50% resistant to heat, so it's kind of a effectively harder test than it would normally be, which I think is a good thing, as heat is very powerful, and it can kind of just show off how it is going to like work at higher levels as well. Yeah, let's just jump into that and get burning. Okay, right before we jump into this test here, I do want to just mention that we are on Tazadupe, which is going to like duplicate the Tazacore and send out our little drones to go and hit everybody. Just usual stuff on Death Cube. We're also going to get Energy Generator and Synth Deconstruct this way, which is going to make a bunch of health orbs appear, which is good, especially if you are running the Equilibrium shard that is optional here, but something I'm probably going to do in the future. The Tazacore, notably for this build, the usual build is this, with its like Shivering Contagion, Spreading, Magnetic, or Radiation, and Corrosive and Cold. But on a build like this, whenever the Tazacore affects enemies that are speared, it does spread the statuses to all those enemies. So on something like this, you probably want to use this, which is Viral Electricity and Magnetic, which is just kind of better things to be spreading to the group, because you really don't need to freeze the enemies with this build, though you still totally can if you prefer that, and of course you get the armor stripping from Corrosive. Just wanted to mention that really quickly here before we actually jump in. as I'm going to be using that other Tazakor build. Yeah, we can just jump in now, head on over to the Kuva Fortress, the Kuva Fortress, and get it started. But yeah, this is definitely an interesting build. I would say that it is mostly an upgrade over the Dante version we showed up last time. The main downside between the two builds is that the Dante version does break boxes. Whenever you cast Dante's ability, it does destroy objects, so that is a small consideration. If you want to like make sure you're opening all of like the loot in a level, that is a consideration that you might take. But otherwise, I think just in general, this is like just good stuff to be doing. Other notable things that I do want to include on this build, but haven't because it just isn't necessary. In terms of shard considerations, 1 equilibrium, 1 energy max is very, very likely where I'm going to end up with this build, because energy max is a little bit low. We're at 225, but usually if you're using your abilities appropriately, it's really not a huge deal. As you can see, we can wipe out some pretty good groups of enemies, which usually is going to mostly refund us. The combo of what we're doing, which is just 4 + 1, costs 60 energy. So if we see, like, you know, a couple health orbs out of that, then we're usually doing pretty good. You do, with your one, with Flare's one, need to be able to see some enemies. So, like, you have a pillar count, which is usually 8 to 10. And you do want to see as many enemies as possible. Obviously, against weaker enemies, you need to see fewer and fewer enemies. And your 4 is non-line of sight. So, like, burning down a hallway like this will still kill enemies over there. So you don't need to be too concerned with it, but I would say that casting your 1 in situations where you can only see a single enemy is usually not going to work out super well for you, and I would try and avoid it if you can. Get over here, pop this, get a bunch of kills that way. I will say Temple's one is like a softer line of sight. It is not super hard line of sight, so certain objects are more generous than others with like what you're going to be able to do. And we can hit the Xmas there for just a moment. You can see that Xmas did not get hit fast enough, but still got some of the procs there. Of course, on Xmas, there's always just like, hey, shooting them with a gun works, and you're Nezha, so you're not in like you're not particularly too squishy because your 3 is quite a good ability. You can see some, like, if you really are maxing out on like the amount of targets that you can hit, like we were there. You can hit quite good numbers on this. Like, just some really nice proc damage that, once again, does not work on a whole lot of enemies. Whenever we, you know, get a spawn for, you know, Malice or Violence or whoever shows up, that is a gun situation. Whenever those enemies are on the table, they are, like, functionally immune to a status build like this, so you don't want to basically ever be using that there. So for that, I have the Latron with me, just the regular Latron build that I went over in my recent Incarnins refreshes and such like that. But of course, I mean, like, just the Latron Incarnin is kind of underselling it. It's one of the best weapons in the game. But you're just going to want to, like, that or, like, the Titron if you're a lower level player. That's quite available. But yeah, overall, I mean, like, the build requires you to have Subsumed Temple, which is not a difficult farm. Actually, I think that farm is quite easy. But Dante's is as well, so whether you want one or the other, they're actually 2 Warframes that are very easy to add, I would say, into the helmet system, because getting an extra copy is just not going to be particularly tough. And if you don't like Temple, or if you don't like Dante, then I guess the great news is that you can use them for this if you like Nezha. So I would say this is like kind of a different thing than what you're going to be getting out of like Temple's gameplay. Like Temple's gameplay mostly uses this ability to reload. Especially since they changed the scaling on Temple's 1 to no longer work off of Temple's 3. But, you know, we kind of just get a lot more out of it here. Because we don't have Lizzie to charge up. What we do have is R4 to work with, which kind of turns into less of like the big single target damage you can get out of Lizzie, and more of a nice AoE clear, which is a great thing to add to a Warframe that's very tanky like Nezha. Enemy spawns being a little wonky. Good chunk of enemies spawned in here, I think. A nice burst there. Pump our 3 back on. We got Torment coming in. We have that Latron Incarnate, as I mentioned. We're quite safe here. We're, of course, like, you know, status immune and everything like that while we're in our 3. So no real threats here. We can cast this one at like a pretty decent distance, so even if enemies are a little on the far side of your 4, you can still get them good. And it's just, like, it's a nice, solid build. Like I said, it's very possible that DE would consider this to be a bug. It's not in the known issues, as far as I could see. But I just think this is, like, a cool way to use Flare's one that is pretty innocuous. Like, in terms of, like, performance, generally this is about the same as my Varuna build. So, like, I mean, the Varuna build is quite good. I think Varuna is in a pretty strong place. And it is also, like, very status-focused. It doesn't work on the same kinds of targets as this. But you have invisibility as your primary form of survival instead of the 90% DR, which arguably is honestly better in a lot of situations. Not to mention Varuna gets all of, like, you know, the stat buffing to melee weapons and so on and so forth, and all of these things you could bring up. But the general gist is that while this is good, we're at 5 minutes and 800 kills. I don't think it's out of line for, like, what we're capable of in Warframe. It is, like, a nice, fun little combination to build around, and I don't really see any problem with it. Like, it's not gonna be cracking through attenuation or some nonsense like that anytime soon or ever. It's just that the way that the heat procs are applied through Flare's one is maybe a little on the odd side. But honestly, I'd rather Flare's one have a good use than not in the subsume system, and there's not a whole lot of other places I could really see it be used. Obviously, we talked about, like, the Vauban interaction, but I would say that one is generally kind of just a worse version of this. And Vauban usually probably would want to stick to the things that are unique about him, because he has the little scaling damage stuff you can do if you were going to do that anyway. But yeah, I mean, like, it's a build that I definitely enjoy. Like, it's like a quick, clear method of, like, oh, see these guys, burn these guys, and, like, then they just die moments later, because of course they have that delay on the heat procs killing them, and, like, making it work, like, you know, the wrinkles against Xmas and so on and so forth. Like, I know I'm just, like, justifying the existence of this build and how it's not a problem, but that's mostly because, like, it's an impressive kill rate, but not anything that, like, a couple other Warframes can't do. And I just don't think it's, like, too crazy. Is it fun and enjoyable and good? Yeah. Crazy? Ridiculous? No, not really. Like, you know, Saren's doing way more busted stuff than this. Obviously, the bar is getting pretty high when we start mentioning Saren. But Nezha has been a pretty high-end Warframe in the past as well, so not anything too crazy for them either. And of course, like, if this were to get nerfed tomorrow, we just use the Dante build, which is just fine. Like, is it weaker than this? Yeah. By a lot? Not by that much. We got Angst here. Just to show this, you can see the damage here. Not fantastic on an enemy like an Acolyte. Damage of the Latron, however, very good. Quite compelling. If you don't have a Latron in Karnan, you might consider it next time it comes around. Would highly advise it personally. It's good for a lot of things. But yeah, just good Nezha stuff. Like, I'm really happy with this augment. You know, we talk about, like, augments that are like, oh, well, this is the augment that, like, makes the ability good or, like, makes the Warframe work. I think this is actually one of the augments that, like, totally is an augment. Because Divine Spears as it stands, or as it stood, like, without this, is like, oh, that's, like, a good ability. Where it, like, you know, CCs all the enemies and hits enemies in, like, a pretty wide radius and stuff. And it was, like, primarily like, oh, yeah, if you're doing CC things and you want to slow down enemies, like, that's good at doing, like, what it says on the tin, right? And, like, you can combine that with, like, the 2 augment and stuff kind of takes advantage of that and so on and so forth. But this giving it kind of a completely different purpose and helping with the damage output, number 1, makes it more compelling in today's meta, and number 2, it is a different functionality. It's not like, oh, this is given this full functionality of actually doing something meaningful, though the argument that crowd control is not very good in today's Warframe is definitely there. This one feels like appropriate to be an augment. Do I think that it needed its range toned down? Nah, not necessarily. Like I said, this is like kind of a lower range version of what Varuna is already capable of, though her range got reduced too from a much, much higher value. But it's good stuff. It's a build that I enjoy. We're just playing base for Temple here. Just get the fire everywhere. But you also get to see some real funny heat numbers with this one, especially like if you get into ideal setup situations with this. Throw our 3 back on. Honestly, probably head for the exit and just like kill groups on our way there. Hopefully you have some enemies spawn in front of us. Also, because it is non-line of sight, you can really clean up some tiles that would normally be such a huge pain. Oh, it's actually back this way. What's down below is where the actual exit is. I guess no reason not to do this. Get a good burn there right before we're about to hit the end here and kind of look at our kill rate. Well, those enemies are just invincible, so that's fine. A tile like this, also a very tall tile where you can use a lot of the AoE is good. In terms of kill rate, that's 1600, 160 KPM. Very compelling, obviously. But not ridiculous. And again, there are targets that'll have trouble with. If you're in like ETA and the modifier is everyone has overguard, this build gets a whole lot worse. Or if you're just like in an Eximus stronghold, can be a lot more like hitchy to use, but I enjoy it. I think it's an improvement on the previous Nezha build. Kind of just does the same thing but better. But that same thing is like pretty fun. I enjoy it a lot. You get to play Nezha, slide around, especially if you enjoy the slidey movement of Nezha like I do. It's a good time. But yeah, that's going to do it for the video. I'll see you tomorrow. Goodbye. Hey everybody, it's time to thank the patrons that are hanging around and supporting the channel. So, to start with that, the $10 patrons are Athean, Alex Barnum, Arbiter Daydream, Barkus, Benuven, Plotomatic, Brutus Salazar, Candelathra, Blob World, Dylan Dworsky, Athrain, James Harthorne, JC4 Science, Josh, Luzanth, Vicokel, Michta, Nerve, Ruby, Sanyu, Sharp247, The Coupon of Death, Waifu Wars, Wodad01, and Zerathir. Also, thanks, of course, to all of the other patrons for supporting the channel. It is much appreciated. It's a little sneak peek on what we're getting into. There's going to be a lot more of these kind of big re-reviews of weapon types and their new builds and stuff as things changed a lot at the end of last year. And, of course, there's also planned new free-to-play before we get into any more big updates. So look forward to that.